On the night before Christmas, when a Montana town was swallowed by the worst snowstorm in 10 years, a child vanished into the white silence. The roads were closed, the wind erased every footprint, and the police had only one option left: a dog no one wanted anymore, a German shepherd labeled unstable and forgotten behind a frozen fence. What happened next changed an entire town forever. This is not just a rescue story, it is a story about trust, hope, and second chances. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and if you believe miracles can still happen in winter storms. Please press subscribe to support the channel and stay with us for this unforgettable journey. Pine Hollow, Montana did not announce winter. It endured it. The town sat folded between two mountain ridges like a secret the world had forgotten how to keep. Its wooden houses hunched low under layers of snow. Its streets narrowed into pale corridors by drifts taller than fences. In the week before Christmas, the storm arrived with a cruelty that felt almost personal. Wind howled through pine needles like an old warning. Snow fell without rhythm, thick and blinding, erasing footprints within seconds. The temperature sank so low that metal burned the skin and breath turned sharp in the lungs. Road signs vanished. The mountain pass closed twice in one day. Pine Hollow Police Department operated on a skeleton crew. The rest snowed in at outlying cabins or stranded on county roads that no plow could reach. Officer Eleanor Hayes arrived on a gray afternoon when the sky seemed to press down on the town like a lid. She drove a state-issued SUV coated in road salt and ice scars, its headlights cutting shallow tunnels through the white. Eleanor was 32 years old, average height, athletic without being bulky, her posture straight in a way that came not from arrogance but habit. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back into a tight, functional braid that spoke of mornings that allowed no vanity. Her face carried the quiet symmetry of someone who had learned to keep emotions from leaking outward. Sharp cheekbones, steady gray eyes, lips that rarely curved into a smile unless it was earned. Years of K-9 service had left faint lines at the corners of her eyes, not from age, but from watching too closely, too often, in moments where mistakes cost lives. Eleanor was known among colleagues as precise rather than warm. She followed protocol with devotion, but never worshipped it. Her reputation came from results, not volume. She did not dominate rooms, she assessed them. What few knew was that her measured demeanor had been shaped by loss years earlier, when a fellow officer and close friend had been killed during a mismanaged operation where warnings were ignored. Since then, Eleanor trusted process, but only when it was anchored to human understanding. She believed control without connection was just another form of failure. She was not here to command. 3 months earlier, Pine Hollow had suffered a professional wound that refused to close. A K-9 assisted pursuit through the surrounding forest had ended badly. A suspect escaped into the snowbound wilderness and was never recovered. No remains, no arrest, just silence and unanswered questions. Internal reports were inconclusive, padded with cautious language and omissions that smelled faintly of fear. Eventually, the file reached the state security office, where it was quietly decided that an independent evaluation was necessary. Not an investigation, not an accusation, an assessment. Eleanor Hayes was assigned the task precisely because she did not belong to Pine Hollow, and because she carried no local loyalties that might soften her judgment. The Pine Hollow police station was a squat brick building, crouched under a white cap, its flagpole rimed with ice. Inside, the air smelled of wet wool, burnt coffee, and old heating vents. Eleanor stepped through the door with a single duffel over her shoulder and a slim black folder tucked under her arm. Conversations slowed, then stopped. Several officers looked up, their expressions guarded, their eyes lingering a second too long on the unfamiliar insignia stitched onto her jacket. Captain Robert Hale emerged from his office moments later. He was in his mid-50s, tall but slightly stooped, with a broad frame that hinted at strength, softened by years of desk duty. His hair was iron gray, cropped short, and his mustache was meticulously trimmed, a habit of control in a town where little else could be controlled. Hale was a man shaped by responsibility. He had grown up in Pine Hollow, worked its streets, watched children he once lectured grow into officers under his command. Loyalty defined him, sometimes at the cost of objectivity. "Officer Hayes," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his eyes assessing. "Welcome to Pine Hollow. Sorry about the weather. Eleanor shook his hand once. I've worked worse, she replied evenly. Her voice was calm, low, carrying neither challenge nor apology. Hale gestured toward the hallway. You'll find we're a small department. We do things a bit close-knit. I'm not here to change how you operate, Eleanor said as they walked, only to understand it. That answer neither pleased nor offended him, which made it more unsettling. Other officers passed them in the corridor. Deputy Mark Collins, late 30s, broad-shouldered with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, nodded stiffly. He had been part of the failed pursuit months earlier, a fact Eleanor already knew from the file. His posture carried defensiveness, masked as professionalism. Dispatcher Sarah Whitmore glanced up from behind the front desk. She was in her early 40s, slim, pale-skinned, with auburn hair pulled into a loose bun that always seemed on the verge of collapse. Sarah was known for her kindness, for remembering birthdays and checking on officers' families during storms. But since the incident, something had shifted. Her smile came slower now. She startled at sudden radio calls. Watching tragedy from a chair had a way of carving quiet scars. Eleanor noticed all of it without comment. Hale showed her a small office near the back. Temporary assignment, he said. You'll have full access to reports, logs, personnel interviews, no command authority. Observational role only. That's understood, Eleanor replied. As Hale left her to settle in, the building seemed to exhale. Eleanor placed her duffel on the floor, hung her coat, and opened the folder. But before she read a single page, she listened. To the wind clawing at the yacht windows, to the hum of fluorescent lights, to the distant bark of a dog from the rear kennel, low and restrained. It was not fear she heard. It was waiting. That evening, Eleanor walked the perimeter of the station grounds as snow thickened, the storm swallowing sound and distance alike. Pine Hollow glowed dimly under street lamps, each light haloed by falling flakes. The town felt suspended, as if holding its breath. People here survived winter not by defying it, but by enduring together. Outsiders were tolerated, not trusted. And Eleanor felt that divide keenly as she moved through the silence, boots crunching over ice. Inside the station, skepticism grew like frost on glass. She heard it in lowered voices, questions unasked. Why now? Why her? Why reopen something they had already buried beneath paperwork and resignation? Eleanor did not address it. She unpacked her notes. She reviewed the timeline. She prepared to listen more than she spoke. Snow continued to fall, indifferent to human discomfort, blanketing Pine Hollow in white. And somewhere behind the station, a German shepherd paced his kennel, unseen and unnamed by her for now, carrying a story that no one here wanted to tell again. The storm would not break before Christmas. Neither would the truth. Morning in Pine Hollow arrived without color. The storm had not ended. It had merely shifted, trading violent snowfall for a relentless wind that scraped ice across rooftops and turned every exposed surface into glass. The sky hung low and white, pressing the town into silence. Christmas lights blinked weakly from porches, half buried, their cheer muted by the cold. Eleanor Hayes woke before dawn, in the small rented room above a closed bakery, her breath fogging the air as she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled on her uniform. The heater clicked uselessly. Winter here did not negotiate. She walked to the station just after 6, boots crunching over frozen drifts, the wind tugging at her coat like an impatient hand. The building was already awake. Coffee brewed, radios murmured, yet something unseen lingered beneath the routine, an unease she had learned to recognize in places where grief had been packed away but not resolved. Captain Robert Hale acknowledged her with a nod as she passed. He looked tired this morning, his shoulders heavier than the day before. Sleep came poorly to men who carried an entire town's mistakes. "Kennels are out back," he said, almost casually, as if mentioning a supply closet. "If you're reviewing K9 operations, you'll want to start there." "I will," Eleanor replied. No one offered to walk with her. The path to the kennels cut behind the station, bordered by snowbanks hardened into jagged walls. The structures themselves were simple, chain-link enclosures with overhead roofing, each stall partially shielded from the wind. Most were empty. The department had once taken pride in its K9 program, but budget cuts and attrition had thinned it down to near absence. Eleanor paused before entering, letting her senses adjust. The air smelled of metal, disinfectant, and something older, resignation. Then she saw him. Atlas occupied the far kennel, away from the others, as if distance itself were part of his containment. He was a German shepherd, approximately 6 years old by Eleanor's estimate, large even for the breed, his frame powerful but currently underused. His coat was a mix of ash gray and black saddle markings, dulled not by age but neglect of purpose. His ears stood erect, alert despite everything, and his amber eyes followed her with a steady, assessing gaze. There was no barking, no pacing, just watchfulness. Atlas had once been considered exceptional. That much Eleanor already knew from the file. His former handler, Officer Daniel Brooks, had been described as patient, intuitive, deeply bonded to his dog. Brooks had collapsed from a heart attack less than an hour after a routine training session. Paramedics arrived too late. Atlas had been kenneled nearby when it happened, forced to watch unfamiliar hands surround his handler, forced to wait without understanding why commands never came again. After that, the reports changed tone, reactive behavior, inconsistent tracking. Responses: failure to disengage under stress, no behavioral reassessment, no trauma protocol, just removal from duty and quiet isolation. Atlas sat as Eleanor approached the fence, his posture upright but restrained. He did not bare teeth. He did not avert his gaze. He simply watched, weighing her. Eleanor stopped several feet away and crouched slowly, careful not to invade his space. She removed her gloves and placed them on the snow beside her, then rested her hands loosely on her knees. She did not speak. Minutes passed. The wind hissed through the chain links. Somewhere inside the station, a radio crackled. Atlas's nostrils flared as he took in her scent. He shifted his weight once, then stilled again. Eleanor understood this silence. Dogs like Atlas had learned that commands often preceded disappointment, that voices brought expectation, and expectation brought failure. She let the quiet stretch, offering nothing that demanded response. After nearly 10 minutes, Atlas stood and stepped forward until his nose brushed the fence. His breath fogged the air between them. Eleanor remained still. When he finally sat again, closer than before, something in his posture softened, not obedience, but allowance. "Hello, Atlas," she said quietly. The name did not trigger agitation. It anchored him. Behind her, footsteps crunched over snow. Deputy Mark Collins stopped a short distance away, arms crossed against the cold. "He doesn't usually come that close," he said, his voice neutral but edged with disbelief. Collins was a man built for action, broad shoulders, thick forearms, movements economical and direct. He had joined the force straight out of the military, bringing with him a worldview shaped by clear threats and clear responses. Gray areas frustrated him. "He's not aggressive," Eleanor said without looking back. "He's unpredictable," Collins countered. "That's worse." Eleanor stood slowly and turned. "Unpredictable to whom?" Collins frowned. "To us." She nodded once, as if that confirmed something. "When was the last time anyone here sat with him without issuing commands?" Collins opened his mouth, then closed it. "We're not handlers," he said after a moment. "We do our jobs." "And he lost his," Eleanor replied, without explanation. Collins shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we all like Brooks, but we can't afford liabilities, not out there." He gestured toward the forest, invisible behind the storm. "That pursuit went wrong. We did what we had to." Eleanor looked past him, toward the tree line swallowed by snow. "You did what you knew how to do," she said. "That's not always the same thing." Collins bristled but said nothing. Eventually he walked away, boots heavy against the ice. Eleanor returned her attention to Atlas. He was watching her again, head slightly tilted now, curiosity edging past caution. She reached out slowly, stopping short of the fence, letting him decide the final distance. After a moment, he leaned forward and pressed his muzzle against her knuckles through the cold metal. Connection, tentative and fragile. Later that morning, Eleanor reviewed the K9 logs inside her office. Training schedules abruptly ended. Behavioral notes grew sparse, then stopped altogether. Atlas had not failed out. He had been faded out. Forgotten, because addressing him required time, patience, and emotional risk the department no longer had room for. Sarah Whitmore knocked lightly before entering. Up close, the dispatcher looked more tired than Eleanor had first realized. Her eyes were kind but shadowed. "Captain Hale asked me to give you these," she said, handing over a stack of radio transcripts from the failed pursuit. "Thank you," Eleanor replied. Sarah hesitated. "You saw the dog?" she said softly. "Yes." Sarah nodded, lips pressed together. "He used to sleep by the radios, wouldn't move until Brooks left the building." "What happened after?" Eleanor asked. Sarah's gaze dropped. "No one wanted to talk about it. Talking made it feel real." She forced a small, apologetic smile. "We're good people here. We just survive winter by not looking too closely at what hurts." Eleanor understood that kind of survival. By the time darkness fell, the storm had returned to full force. Snow piled against doors and windows, the town shrinking inward. Eleanor walked back to the kennels one last time before night patrols began. Atlas stood when he saw her, tail low but wagging once, restrained and uncertain. "You're not broken," she murmured, though she knew he understood tone more than words. "You were just left alone." The wind howled louder, as if objecting. Inside the station, plans were being made for Christmas coverage, minimal staffing, delayed responses if roads closed. No one yet knew that in 2 nights, a child would vanish into this storm. No one yet understood that Atlas's waiting was nearly over. But winter has a way of forcing truths into the open. And some bonds, once tested by loss, do not weaken. They endure. Christmas Eve descended on Pine Hollow without mercy. By late afternoon, the storm returned with renewed strength, as if the mountains themselves had chosen this night to remind the town who truly ruled the land. Snow fell sideways, driven by wind that screamed through alleys and rattled window panes. The sky darkened early, the sun swallowed behind thick rolling clouds that carried no hint of peace or celebration. Porch lights flickered on, one by one, glowing weakly through the white haze. Church bells rang at 6, their sound muffled and distant, as though buried beneath layers of ice. Inside the Miller household, warmth fought valiantly against the cold. Noah Miller, 9 years old, stood near the front door tugging on his winter boots with clumsy determination. Noah was small for his age, slight and narrow-shouldered, with pale skin that flushed easily in the cold, and a mess of sandy brown hair that never seemed to stay combed. His eyes were large and curious, the kind that noticed everything and trusted too easily. He was known in the neighborhood as a gentle child, polite to adults, quiet among louder peers, happiest when drawing pictures or helping his mother with small tasks. Since his father had passed away 2 years earlier in a logging accident, Noah had matured quickly, carrying a seriousness that did not belong to someone so young. He worried about his mother more than she realized. That evening, he clutched a small rectangular box wrapped in red paper, a green ribbon tied carefully around it. Inside was a hand-carved wooden angel, uneven and imperfect, something he had worked on secretly with a neighbor over several afternoons. It was meant to be a surprise, a Christmas gift, to remind his mother that he was still here, that they were still a family. "I'll be quick," Noah said, pulling on his knit hat. "Mrs. Turner said I could bring it over before dinner." His mother, Linda Miller, hesitated in the doorway. She was 36, slender, with tired eyes that carried years of quiet resilience. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands escaping around her face. Linda worked 2 part-time jobs to keep their small home running, and worry had become her constant companion since her husband's death. She looked out into the storm, her stomach tightening. "It's snowing harder," she said. "Maybe tomorrow." "It's just next door," Noah replied gently, already reaching for his coat. "I'll be back before you know it." She nodded reluctantly, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "All right, straight there and straight back." Noah stepped outside, the door closing softly behind him. 300 meters, that was all. A short walk even in winter. But the storm did not care about distance. By the time Noah reached the edge of the Turner property, the wind had strengthened. Snow erased the narrow path between houses, piling quickly against fences and shrubs. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The familiar shapes of buildings blurred into shadowy outlines. At some point on the return, Noah hesitated. He turned the wrong way, drawn by what he thought was his porch light shimmering through the snow. It was not. Minutes passed, then more. The cold began to seep through his gloves, through his boots. Panic fluttered in his chest, sharp and sudden. He called out once, then again, his voice torn away by the wind. Instinct drove him forward, each step heavier than the last, until exhaustion forced him to stop beneath the shelter of a tall pine tree at the edge of the frozen creek bed. By the time Linda Miller realized something was wrong, the sky had fully darkened. At the Pine Hollow police station, the radio crackled urgently. Missing juvenile, last seen approximately 30 minutes ago. 9-year-old male, Christmas Eve, weather conditions severe. Eleanor Hayes was standing near the dispatch desk when the call came in. She felt the shift instantly, the tightening of the room, the way officers straightened, hands moving with sharpened focus. Captain Robert Hale emerged from his office, his expression grim. "We've got a missing child," he said. "Miller boy, lives near Ridge Street." Deputy Mark Collins swore under his breath. "In this storm?" Sarah Whitmore's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up maps, addresses, last known locations. Her face drained of color, but her voice remained steady. "Wind chill is dropping fast, -18 and falling." The K9 situation was assessed within minutes. It was not good. One dog was out with a leg injury, kennel-bound for weeks. Another was in retraining after failing scent discrimination tests. The remaining resources were human and limited. Volunteers were already being called, but roads were closing, and time was bleeding away with every gust of wind. Eleanor listened, heart heavy. She knew the numbers. She knew what cold did to a small body. "I can run Atlas," she said. The room fell silent. Captain Hale turned slowly toward her. His jaw tightened. "He hasn't been field tested in almost a year." "He's trained," Eleanor replied, "and he's capable." "He's unpredictable," Collins snapped. "So is this storm," Eleanor said evenly. "But the child doesn't have another option." Hale rubbed a hand over his face. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking seconds that no one could afford. Finally, he exhaled. "Harness him," he said. "But you're not alone. Collins, you go with her. Radio's on at all times." Minutes later, Atlas stood in the snow outside the station. The search harness fitted snugly around his powerful chest. His posture was alert, energy coiled beneath restraint. This was the first operational gear he had worn in months. Eleanor knelt briefly to meet his gaze, her gloved hand resting against his neck. "Find," she said softly, offering Noah's scarf for scent. Atlas Asis inhaled deeply. His body shifted, focus locking in. The waiting was over. They moved into the storm, flashlights cutting narrow cones through the darkness. Wind tore at them relentlessly. Snow stung exposed skin. Atlas led, pulling forward with controlled urgency, his movements confident but cautious. Twice the scent thinned and scattered, the wind playing cruel tricks. Each time, Eleanor adjusted course, reading Atlas's body language, trusting his instincts where others might have doubted. Deputy Collins struggled to keep up, his breath ragged. Doubt gnawed at him, but he said nothing. Watching Atlas work, really work, unearthed an unease he could not name. At -47, everything changed. Atlas stopped abruptly. He did not bark. He did not strain against the leash. He froze, ears forward, body rigid in a way Eleanor recognized instantly. Alarm. Certainty. "There," Eleanor whispered. Beneath the ancient pine, half buried in snow, lay a small shape. Eleanor dropped to her knees, heart hammering. Noah's face was pale, his lips tinged blue, his arms wrapped tightly around the small gift box pressed to his chest. He was breathing, shallow, weak, but alive. Eleanor stripped off her outer coat and wrapped it around him, pulling him close, sharing what warmth she could. She whispered to him, words blending with prayer, voice shaking but controlled. Atlas sat pressed against them, a solid, living barrier against the wind. Rescue teams arrived minutes later, their shouts cutting through the storm. Relief broke over the scene like dawn. Christmas bells rang faintly in the distance. Winter had nearly won, but not tonight. Dawn did not arrive cleanly in Pine Hollow. It seeped in through the storm like a reluctant witness, turning the night's violence into a pale, exhausted gray. Snow still fell, though less fiercely now, drifting downward in thick, silent sheets that muffled sound and blurred distance. The mountains stood like ghosts beyond the town, half erased, watching without mercy. Christmas morning found Pine Hollow awake but shaken, its streets scarred by tire tracks, footprints already disappearing beneath fresh powder, as if the land itself wished to forget how close it had come to tragedy. At the small county clinic, heat hummed through old radiators as Noah Miller lay wrapped in layers of blankets, his small body dwarfed by the hospital bed. His face had regained some color, though his skin remained pale and fragile, like thin porcelain. An oxygen mask rose and fell gently with each breath. Doctors moved quietly, efficient and cautious, their voices low. Noah was stable, they said. Hypothermia, mild frostbite on his fingers, dehydration. Serious but survivable. Words that felt like gifts. Linda Miller sat beside the bed, her hands trembling as she clutched her son's. Tears tracked endlessly down her cheeks, cutting clean lines through exhaustion and fear. She was still wearing the same sweater from the night before, stretched and damp at the cuffs. Her dark eyes, rimmed red, never left Noah's face. When Eleanor Hayes entered the room, Linda stood abruptly, as if pulled by instinct alone. "You found him," Linda said, her voice breaking. She looked at Eleanor as though trying to imprint her face forever. "You brought him back." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude delivered so raw. "Atlas did," she said quietly. "I just followed." Linda shook her head. "You didn't give up." She reached out and gripped Eleanor's hands, her touch desperate and warm. "Everyone else might have. You didn't." Eleanor felt the weight of that statement settle deep in her chest. She nodded once, unable to find words that felt adequate. Outside, Pine Hollow stirred slowly. News traveled fast in small towns, especially when carried by relief. The story of the missing boy, the storm, and the German shepherd who had led officers through near impossible conditions spread from porch to porch, from the clinic to the cafe, from whispered conversations to grateful tears. But beneath the relief, another current moved, quiet, uneasy, persistent. Questions. Why Atlas? Why now? Why had this dog been sidelined for nearly a year? At the police station, Captain Robert Hale stood alone in his office, staring down at old files spread across his desk. The night had left its mark on him. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his mustache untrimmed for the first time in years. He held Atlas's file in his hands, thicker than it should have been, pages yellowed at the edges. Reports, assessments, addendums that grew shorter over time, as if language itself had failed. Hale had built his career on protecting this town, on making hard calls, on believing that doing nothing was sometimes the safest option. But as he reread the notes, the abrupt end to evaluations, the lack of follow-up, something inside him cracked. He remembered Officer Daniel Brooks, remembered his laughter, his pride in Atlas, the way the dog used to sit perfectly still by the doorway until Brooks whistled. Hale had attended the funeral. He had told himself that removing Atlas from duty was an act of caution, of responsibility. Now it felt like abandonment. Deputy Mark Collins stood in the doorway, hat in hand. He looked older than he had the day before, the sharp edges of his certainty dulled. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Hale didn't look up. "You were there last night," he said. "You saw how that dog worked." Collins swallowed. Images replayed in his mind. Atlas cutting cleanly through the chaos, reading the storm like a map, refusing to be distracted, refusing to fail. "Yes, sir." "Did he seem unstable to you?" Collins hesitated, then shook his head. "No, he was focused, calm. Better than any K9 I've seen in a long time." Hale closed the file slowly. "We failed him," he said, the words heavy and final. Later that afternoon, Eleanor stood alone in the kennel area, the storm now reduced to a steady fall of soft snow. Atlas sat across from her, alert but relaxed, his breath rising in gentle clouds. Up close, she noticed details others might have missed, the faint scar along his muzzle, the way his tail curled slightly at the tip, the intelligence in his eyes sharpened by loss and patience. He was not young anymore, but neither was he diminished. If anything, his experiences had carved depth into him. "You didn't hesitate," Eleanor murmured, "even after everything." Atlas tilted his head, ears twitching, as if listening not just to her voice, but to her meaning. Captain Hale approached quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he removed his hat. "Officer Hayes," he began, his voice rough, "I owe you an apology." Eleanor turned, surprised. "I doubted your judgment," Hale continued. "And I doubted that dog. I let fear and reputation guide decisions that should have been guided by understanding." He glanced at Atlas, his expression softening. "I'm sorry." Eleanor studied him carefully. Apologies like this were rare, especially spoken aloud, especially in front of witnesses. "What matters is what happens next," she said. Hale nodded. "The state will want answers, reviews, explanations. I won't hide from that." He exhaled slowly. "Atlas deserves better. So does this department." As word spread, the tone within the station shifted. Officers who had avoided the kennels now paused, watching Atlas with something like respect. Sarah Whitmore brought a fresh blanket and draped it carefully over the kennel's sheltered corner, her eyes shining. "He always listened," she said softly to Eleanor, "even when we didn't." By evening, the storm eased further. Snow still covered Pine Hollow, but the wind no longer screamed. It sighed. Lights glowed warmer now, reflecting off white streets that felt less hostile, more forgiving. Church doors opened for a delayed Christmas service, bells ringing clearer than they had the night before. Eleanor walked through town as dusk settled, boots leaving shallow prints that lasted longer now. She passed the Miller house, lights blazing inside, shadows moving, life reclaimed. She felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized had been clenched. Back at the kennels, Atlas lay curled but alert, eyes following her as she approached. She knelt and rested her forehead briefly against the cold metal fence. "You were never the problem," she whispered. "You were the answer waiting too long." Snow drifted down gently, each flake unique, fleeting, unstoppable. Winter had come close, so close to taking everything. But it had not won. Not because the storm weakened, but because someone finally listened. The morning after Christmas did not feel like an ending in Pine Hollow. It felt like an examination. Snow still lay thick on rooftops and roads, but the storm had retreated just enough to allow the town to look at itself clearly, without the excuse of chaos. The sky was a washed-out blue, brittle and cold, and the air carried that particular stillness that followed survival, when relief and reckoning shared the same breath. At the Pine Hollow police station, the building filled earlier than usual. Officers arrived before their shifts, boots stamping snow from soles, faces solemn rather than celebratory. Coffee went untouched, conversation stayed low. The rescue of Noah Miller had saved a child, but it had also opened a door no one could pretend not to see. Captain Robert Hale stood at the head of the briefing room, shoulders squared, posture rigid with resolve. In daylight, he looked older than he had the night before. His lined face bore the weight of a man who understood that leadership did not end at success. It was measured by what followed. He held a thin folder in his hands, Atlas's file, stripped of its old padding, reorganized with care. "Before we talk patrol schedules," Hale said, voice steady but subdued, "we need to address last night, not the rescue, the decisions that came before it." The room stilled. Eleanor Hayes sat along the side wall, arms loosely crossed, observing rather than occupying space. Her expression was neutral, but her attention was sharp. She did not come here seeking validation. She came for truth. Hale continued, "This department labeled a K-9 as unfit without proper reevaluation. We failed to consider trauma. We failed to consult specialists. We failed to revisit assumptions." He paused, then said the words that mattered most. "Those failures nearly cost a child his life." Deputy Mark Collins shifted uncomfortably in his chair. In the harsh clarity of morning, his usual confidence looked worn thin. Collins had always been decisive, a man who trusted strength and certainty. But last night had fractured something in him. He had watched Atlas work with a calm precision that exposed the hollowness of old judgments. "I pushed for pulling Atlas from duty," Collins said suddenly, standing. His voice was rough. "I thought I was protecting the team. I was wrong." He glanced briefly at Eleanor, then at Hale. "I didn't understand what grief does to a working dog, or to people." No one interrupted him. Sarah Whitmore sat near the radio console, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes were red but clear. When Hale looked her way, she nodded faintly. "We all avoided the kennel," she said softly. "It was easier than admitting we didn't know how to help." Hale closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them. "The State Security Office has requested a formal review," he said, "and they'll get it, unfiltered, transparent." He turned his gaze toward Eleanor. "Officer Hayes has already submitted preliminary observations." Eleanor inclined her head slightly. "Atlas's removal from duty was not based on aggression or incompetence," she said calmly. "It was based on unaddressed psychological trauma. He reacted to handler loss the way any bonded working partner might, with confusion, heightened sensitivity, and waiting." That last word settled heavily in the room. Hale drew a breath. "Effective immediately, Atlas is reinstated as an active K-9, pending continued evaluation under Officer Hayes' supervision." Murmurs rippled through the room, not protest, but something closer to acceptance. After the briefing, Eleanor stepped outside into the pale sunlight. Snow crunched beneath her boots, the sound sharp and clean. She walked toward the kennels, where Atlas was already awake, ears pricked at her approach. In daylight, his coat caught subtle shades of silver and charcoal, his strength evident even in stillness. He was not pacing. He was not restless. He was ready. "You heard," Eleanor said quietly as she knelt near the fence. "They're listening now." Atlas rose and stepped closer, his tail wagging once, measured, controlled. His eyes held her gaze, steady and unafraid. Later that day, Eleanor accompanied Hale to the county administrative office to begin formal documentation. The process was tedious, detailed, necessary. Every oversight was named, every missed opportunity recorded. Hale did not soften language or shield reputations. It was the hardest thing he had done in years. By afternoon, news of the review spread beyond the station. At the general store, townspeople spoke of Atlas not as a problem, but as the dog who found Noah. Children pressed their faces to windows when Eleanor walked past the kennels with him for a brief exercise run, their breath fogging the glass. An elderly man tipped his hat. A woman left a knitted scarf on the fence, red and green, with a handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you." Eleanor found herself unexpectedly at the center of attention she did not want. She deflected praise, redirected it to Atlas, to the team, to the town. Praise did not interest her. Change did. That evening, Captain Hale stood in the open bay of the station, watching Eleanor return Atlas to his kennel after training drills. The dog moved with confidence now, responding smoothly to commands, his body language relaxed yet alert. Hale felt a tightening in his chest, not regret alone, but something closer to humility. "I should have done better," Hale said when Eleanor joined him. "We all learn on borrowed time," she replied. "The question is whether we use it." Hale nodded slowly. "The state's report will recommend restructuring the K-9 program. They'll ask who should lead it." He hesitated. "I'd like to put your name forward." Eleanor studied the snowy yard beyond the fence. Pine Hollow was quiet now, its houses lit warmly, against the cold, smoke rising from chimneys like gentle prayers. She thought of the night before, of the wind, of a child nearly lost, of a dog nearly forgotten. "Let's see how the next few days go," she said. As darkness fell, Atlas lay curled in his kennel, the red scarf draped around his neck. He was no longer isolated. Officers passed by, some stopping to speak softly to him, others simply nodding. The fear had lifted. In its place was something more difficult, but far stronger. Accountability. Christmas had passed, but its work had not. Sometimes miracles are not sudden. Sometimes they arrive the morning after, asking what you will do now that you know better. The week after Christmas unfolded gently in Pine Hollow, as if the town itself were learning how to move again without bracing for impact. Snow still blanketed everything, rooftops, fences, the sloping shoulders of the mountain road, but it no longer felt hostile. It lay quiet and luminous under a soft winter sun, reflecting light into windows and across faces that had begun, cautiously, to smile. The storm that had threatened to take so much had receded, leaving behind a rare clarity, the kind that arrives only after people survive something together. Eleanor Hayes spent those days moving between routine and reflection. She reviewed K-9 protocols, updated training schedules, and walked Atlas twice daily along the tree line bordering the frozen creek. The dog's gait had changed. Where there had once been restraint layered over readiness, there was now confidence, calm and grounded. Atlas was 6 years old, no longer a young dog, but not past his prime. His coat shone darker with proper care, his muscles responding quickly to renewed purpose. He worked not with urgency, but with assurance, as though he finally understood that he was allowed to do what he had been waiting to do all along. The town noticed. At the diner on Main Street, Eleanor felt eyes follow her, not with suspicion, but with something gentler. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. People nodded when she passed. Someone paid for her coffee without saying a word. Another left a bag of homemade dog treats at the station, wrapped neatly in wax paper, addressed simply to Atlas. He sniffed them carefully before accepting, tail wagging once in approval. Captain Robert Hale watched these changes with a mix of relief and resolve. He had filed the final report to the State Security Office, accepting full responsibility for the department's failures and recommending immediate restructuring of the K-9 program. There were consequences, mandatory retraining, external oversight, but Hale did not resist them. Leadership, he had learned too late, was not about avoiding blame. It was about carrying it openly. On the 7th day after Christmas, Eleanor was called into Hale's office. The storm had fully passed now, leaving the sky clear and brittle blue. Sunlight streamed through the window, glinting off framed commendations and old photographs lining the walls. Men and women who had served Pine Hollow across decades, many now gone. Hale gestured for her to sit. He looked steadier than he had in days, his posture straight, his voice firm. The state approved the restructuring, he said. They're offering funding to rebuild the K-9 unit properly, new evaluations, trauma-informed handling, one condition. Eleanor met his gaze. They want leadership continuity. Hale nodded. They want you. The words settled between them, heavier than Eleanor expected. She had known this was coming. The offer to stay, to lead Pine Hollow's K-9 program, had hovered unspoken since SAWS. Christmas morning, the alternative was equally clear. She could return to her former unit, to familiar systems, familiar colleagues, a life already mapped. This town needs someone who understands what happened, Hale continued, not just tactically, humanly. He paused. I won't pretend Pine Hollow is easy, but I believe you belong here, if you want to. Eleanor did not answer immediately. She looked past him, out the window, toward the mountains standing silent and enduring. She thought of the night Atlas had stepped into the storm without hesitation, of the quiet gratitude in Linda Miller's eyes, of a town learning, slowly, to forgive itself. I'll stay, she said at last. Hale exhaled, something like relief crossing his face. Then, welcome home, he replied simply. That evening, Pine Hollow gathered in the town square for a belated Christmas celebration. The storm had forced them to cancel the original event, but no one minded. In some ways, this felt more honest. Celebration earned, not assumed. A tall fir tree stood at the center, its branches heavy with snow and lights that glowed warm against the dusk. Children laughed, their breath rising in white clouds. Music drifted from a small speaker, soft and imperfect. Eleanor stood near the edge of the square, Atlas sitting beside her. He wore the red scarf gifted earlier in the week, the color vivid against his dark coat. His posture was relaxed, ears flicking occasionally toward distant sounds, alert but at peace. People approached slowly, respectfully. Some asked to pet him, others simply thanked him, their voices thick with emotion. Atlas accepted it all with quiet dignity. As the countdown to the new year began, Eleanor unclipped the leash. It was a small gesture, but meaningful. Atlas remained seated at her side, choosing connection over command. Snow began to fall again, not the violent storm of before, but a gentle, steady drift, flakes catching in hair and scarves like whispered blessings. Eleanor looked around at the faces illuminated by lights and laughter. Pine Hollow was still a hard place. Winter would return again and again, indifferent to human hope. But something had shifted here. Trust, once broken, was being rebuilt, not through force, but through understanding. Atlas leaned slightly into her leg, warm and solid. She rested a gloved hand on his head, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Christmas had stayed, not in decorations or songs, but in what it had changed. A child had been saved, A dog had been redeemed, and a woman, long accustomed to leaving, had found a reason to remain. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not announce themselves. They simply endure. At the end of this story, we are reminded of a simple but powerful truth. Miracles do not always arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes God works quietly through loyalty, through patience, and through hearts that refuse to give up. On a frozen Christmas night, when hope seemed buried under snow, God placed the right people and the right soul in the right moment. A child was saved, a broken dog was restored, and a town learned that love can still find its way through the storm. In our daily lives, we all face moments when something or someone feels forgotten, misunderstood, or judged too quickly. This story reminds us to slow down, to look again, and to trust that God is still working even when the road looks cold and empty. When we choose compassion over fear and faith over doubt, we open the door for miracles to happen right where we stand. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what lesson you felt the most. And if you believe in the quiet miracles of God, please comment Amen so we can pray together as one community. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to support more stories of faith, hope, and second chances. May God bless you, your family, and everyone watching today, and may His light guide you even through the longest winter.